Welcome to the Growth Leaders Podcast, where we dive deep into the minds of the visionary leaders shaping our world. Today, we have the privilege of hosting Joe Nocera, partner leader at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, a true titan in the realm of cybersecurity, anti-money laundering, cybercrime investigation, and more. With decades of experience safeguarding the digital frontiers of armed forces, banks, and top corporations worldwide, Joe stands as a beacon of expertise in an ever-evolving landscape of cyber threats. Join us as we unravel the personal and professional journey of this cybersecurity luminary, only on the Growth Leaders Podcast. Get ready to be inspired. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Peter. It's exciting to be here.
It is indeed. I was just, when I went through, all what you do, and then one of my conclusions already from the beginning, it must be more exciting than ever being where you are from being in the career as a knowledge leader, what's happening with the wars, with the cyber attacks, small to large corporations. We have technology, the generative AI, I'm guessing throwing attacks and, of course, preventing attack and so on. But before we jump into all this, for our listeners, could you just share a little bit, how did you get there? What got you into this exciting field, which, is growing so fast right now?
Yeah, I was reflecting on your opening there, and I'm very lucky to be in the field that I'm in. It's really been fascinating and ever changing, which is enabled me to continue to grow as a professional and as an intellectual. I got into the field really right out of college. I started my college career as a computer science major. I eventually switched into business and a business technology major that existed, which really allowed me to combine my love of technology with some of my business interests. And most of the jobs in 1995 and 96, when I was interviewing, were programmer jobs. And I was already kind of an enthusiast when it came to the internet and using the internet. And so the idea of securing the internet was really, really interesting to me. So I started my career as an ethical hacker at Coopers & Lybrand, which eventually merged with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And that was a great training ground. It allowed me to really think like a hacker and develop some of those base technical skills. And it's really, over time, given me a good foundation to build on. But I think what was most exciting to me about the career is just the constant change. You mentioned all these new technologies like generative AI. In cybersecurity, every 12 to 18 months, the techniques and the tools are changing. And if you're not committed to continuing to learn and grow and empowering your team to do that, you just can't be successful. And so thankfully, that's what I really enjoy. I love learning. I love growing as both a person and a professional. And so it's been a really good fit.
So in your view, what is driving these cyber threats, the cyber attacks right now?
Sure. If I think about what drives cyber attacks, I start with the notion that each cyber attack is actually, launched by a human or a group of humans that has a motivation. It's not just, code that goes off on its own and does something. And those motivations generally go across a couple of categories. There is a political motivation that typically is around espionage or something like that. And nation state actors tend to be, most motivated by that goal. In many cases, there's a financial motivation. We think about our cyber criminals as being, financially motivated. But that being said, we do see some nation states, particularly nation states that are under Western sanctions, leveraging cybercrime-like methods to actually fund the state's efforts. And then lastly, we see attacks that are really some other type of motivation, a hacktivist that has some social goal or agenda that's really trying to maybe embarrass or bring light onto a specific thing that's happening in the world. And so each of those actors has different motivations. They have different resources that are available to them, which perhaps changes the sophistication or the degree of effort that they put in to achieving their goals.
So when you reflect on this, so what pivotal experience has shaped your leadership in this? I see you as a knowledge leader, even though you have a lot of people, etc. But over these years, so what has shaped that in your thinking as a leader, and both for your employees, but also for transferring that knowledge, skill set to other leaders?
As I mentioned earlier, the threat landscape changes so quickly that you have to be passionate about learning, and you have to be willing to do the time, whether it's reading, being in a lab, building and configuring, or testing out a new attack. You really need to dive into that. I remember really early in my career, um, a new operating system came out. You may remember Windows 2000 obviously came out around the year
Absolutely.
2000.
That's
It
not
was
too
a
long ago, is it?
Yeah, it's not too long ago now. I guess it's 24 years ago. But
Yeah.
it was really a change in the security model for Microsoft and for Windows. And I was pretty new into my career at that point, 2 or 3 years in. I really dove all in and really focused on learning how the security in that new operating system worked. And I became our firm's global expert on Windows 2000 security. I wrote all of our methodologies and our tools for how we both assessed and then secured the technology, to the point that I even, worked for a time with Microsoft as a consultant, advising them on how they could work with their clients to improve security. And one of the things that really drove home to me was the change that was happening in cybersecurity was a great leveler. You didn't need 20 years
Mhm.
of experience to become an expert. If you were willing to learn, you were willing to dive into the new topic, you could very quickly, accelerate your career. And so I think I've been able to do that a number of times in my career. And I use that example with my team, that, generative AI is the one we talk about today. So I've got,
Mm.
24-year-olds and 25-year-olds that are on my team. I'm like, look,
Yeah.
we started with generative AI at exactly the same time. My 25 years of experience are irrelevant on that topic to some degree. You have the opportunity to really dive in and to learn from there. And so I think, I don't know what the next one of those technologies is going to be three to 5 years from now, but I'm sure it'll be out there, and it'll be another opportunity for some young person to develop their career.
But I think you're pointing here at something extremely important, which I've seen within our own company also. That's actually combining the experience with the tech savvy generation coming up. Either they've been playing games all the time, they know, or they have a different way of thinking. Uh, is that an approach which you see is successful moving forward? And does companies, do they embrace that also in a way which makes them successful in preventing attacks and so on?
Sure. I think cybersecurity is certainly a field where diversity of all forms is really important. And so you touched on
Mm.
diversity of age or generation and familiarity with certain technologies, but even diversity in thinking. When I'm bringing together a team, I've got really technical people that can understand how the technology works. But in many cases, I've got people that have political science degrees or law enforcement backgrounds, or, in one case, a neuroscience person by trade. They're able to actually look at the problem, look at the cyber event that's happening from a different perspective, and actually
Mm.
identify some potential things that just the technical analysis might not see. And so that allows us, during the middle of an incident, to really think about what might be the motivations of the actor and what might be their likely next step. And so I found that it's really important to create diverse teams. And again, thinking about diversity from all kind of lenses or dimensions of that ultimately gets us to a better answer.
So they're also bringing in the cultural aspects, that we approach problem solving in different ways. Also, that is interesting. So I recently looked into and read the parts of your latest 2024, the Global Digital Trust Insights. And when I look at that report, which I think a lot of people should read, uh, I see a big spread in, the top performance and the average. And if that is the average, then there's a lot of poor performers in this. So when you speak to management teams, executive teams, and so on, and they are still, early on, what are your key messages here to actually get this running? I mean, there's different levels here, but let's take that scenario first.
Sure. So one of the things I start with is there's really no such thing as one size fits all security. Every organization has a different business, a different set of assets that would be valuable to an attacker for one reason or another, which makes them either more or less likely to be attacked, and it might cause a certain type of actor that I talked about earlier. If you're in the aerospace and defense industry, your nation state actor is probably the most likely person to target you. If you're in a bank, your most likely person that's going to target you is a cyber criminal that's financially motivated. And so starting first with really understanding what inherently do we do as a business that causes us to be a target of these actors? And then once we understand that, starting to say, okay, what would be most damaging for them to do? You think about a retailer that would have some type of ransomware attack that would happen over, the holiday shopping period would be much more damaging than perhaps, a smaller attack that happens during a summer period of holiday or something like that, right? It's a really understanding your business, your unique risks. And then the last piece of it really goes to, your risk appetite. We all have different risk appetites. Some are very risk adverse and conservative in their nature. Others, kind of see themselves as an innovator and somebody that's on the leading edge, and they're willing to take on more risk potentially. And so I think you have to factor all of that in to developing a cybersecurity strategy. And then I think the last piece of it is you can't have perfect security. You can't lead with kind of fear and uncertainty of what could happen. You've got to really take it and make your best decision based upon the information that you have and what your organization's own risk appetite really looks like.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And when you do the analysis of your study here, nearly 4,000 people, one of the things is the cloud, the cloud security. Another is what we call the generative artificial intelligence, and so on. How do you approach that? Because if you look at the cloud technology, then we also have most of the time a third party in there, or getting more and more. I mean, previously we had our own stuff in house, and we were banks, we had at least two or more places where we had backups, etc. So how do they tackle these things, and how do they approach it? Because it's not an easy task. It cannot be an easy task.
You have to be intentional about it. I think if there's a underlying assumption that the cloud just magically transfers the responsibility to a third party and they're fully accountable for it, that's not a recipe for success. You hear the cloud service providers talk a lot about the shared responsibility model, where the customer really communicates what their security expectations and requirements are. The cloud provider articulates, this is what I can provide for you at kind of a foundation level, depending on if you're a platform as a service or an application software as a service type solution. And then the customer really realizing what responsibilities they maintain, whether it be encryption keys or configuration information, or perhaps picking passwords or authentication secrets. That's the first part of it. The second part is really understanding your resiliency requirements. If you're going to go with a single cloud provider, thinking about redundancy zones, so you might have different parts of the world and multiple instances. Many of my clients choose to be multi-cloud, where they work with a number of cloud providers, and they're able to switch between them depending upon what's happening. And so I think that comes into play. But you touched on something I think that's worth going back to is, particularly for smaller organizations, it's very difficult to build your own security capabilities. We hear a lot about the shortage of cybersecurity talent. Many of these large cloud service providers have much greater capabilities when it comes to cybersecurity than smaller middle market type companies. And so I think in those instances, there's an opportunity to actually improve your security by going to the cloud.
Yeah. And how do you at PwC recommend the organizations to actually raise the awareness? I know you have been speaking a little bit about these things before, but I think it's so important. How do you approach it, and how do we actually get everyone? It is, if we move it all the way back to the home, teaching the kids what's dangerous, and then ask them, to keep an eye on it because they do that a hell lot better than me, and so on. But now we're talking larger organizations. So what recipes do you normally advise on those things,
Sure. So,
getting
there's certainly
everyone involved?
there's certainly general user awareness training that you would do for all employees, where you would educate them on things like phishing attacks and not clicking on links in email, and then perhaps more targeted trainings for various roles. So if you're in the wire transfer function of an organization, you might be trained specifically on, customer authentication and callback procedures. If you're in a call center, you might have specific things, how you verify the authenticity of a customer that's calling in. If you're a business executive and you're focused on a new application that's being developed, or maybe you're the first one to go to the cloud, that's a different type of awareness that you're trying to create and what their responsibilities are to ensure that security is being engineered into the solution. I even see, board members, another area where there's a lot of training and awareness, as this has become a big topic for the boards to get their arms around and understand what their responsibilities are and understand a little bit better of what good looks like. And so there's training that happens there. The last thing I would say is just, go ahead, Peter.
No, I just on the board, because that was really my next question.
Yeah.
Is there the level which is expected today in general on the boards in terms of skills and so on, or should you have a specialist there, or how would you approach that?
Yeah, so I'll take the second part of your question first. We're not recommending solely going out and hiring a cybersecurity professional for your boards. You look at the makeup of any board, you're looking for a number of skill sets, and certainly if somebody has a technology or a cyber background, that might be a plus. I think what many organizations are doing is looking to upskill the existing board members that they have so that they get sufficient knowledge to ask the right questions and to demonstrate their oversight. There are certainly board-focused training materials that are available. Here in the United States, the National Association of Corporate Directors has come out with a white paper around the board's responsibilities and good questions to ask.
That's great.
And so generally, when I see a cybersecurity professional that has got onto a board, sometimes I feel like the rest of the board almost defers to them, and they're the single person on the board that's exercising this oversight. I find it to be much more powerful when multiple board members have leaned into the topic, have taken the other business acumen that they have, and applied it to cybersecurity. That ultimately, I think, creates a better governance model between the board and management.
Yeah. Okay. But that's a good insight. So moving then to the next hot topic in this. So generative AI.
Sure.
What is it? Maybe have a short explanation in your words on that, but also, I mean, performing the threats, we had initially here, we said it could be states, it could be, other countries, but I guess there's also private civs doing these things. But what is it, and how should we look into this? Yeah.
Sure.
I'll keep it there.
Yeah. So, generative AI, of course, is the ability to generate a text-based response to a prompt based upon leveraging both data that the model has been trained on and artificial intelligence algorithms to essentially predict a likely response based upon the original prompt. So it's very text-based and text-heavy. If I think about, what does it mean for cybersecurity? I really think about it from two perspectives. One is, how do I use AI to really get more cyber secure? And then secondarily, kind of how do I secure AI to make sure that I'm using AI in a responsible fashion? And so I'll take on kind of the AI for cybersecurity first. Some areas where we're seeing, I'd say right now we're still in the early days. So I think a lot of what I'm seeing right now from customers is experimentation, piloting, proofs of concepts. They really haven't industrialized it yet, where there's an operational model. But a couple areas of experimentation. One is, finding vulnerabilities in code. So the ability to scan the text that is code and say, where are there likely secure coding errors that are there? To actually generate code, right? You're able to say, provide me a sample of what code might look like. And so Again, it does a really good job of generating code snippets and code samples based upon the right
Yeah,
prompts.
I understand that. Yeah.
Thinking about risk scenarios, I had one customer that was working on a crisis simulation for a cyber attack. And if you ask one of the generative AI models to say, give me 5 potential tabletop exercises to simulate current cyber threats, it does a pretty good job of coming up with several scenarios that you might be able to build on. And then you can ask the follow-up prompts to really build a robust cyber simulation. It does a decent job of scanning regulatory requirements and deriving specific cybersecurity requirements from those regulations and helping you think about what your technical and operational controls might be. We've seen some clients that use it to summarize cyber incidents. And so after an incident occurs, there's a bunch of log information, what did the organization do, et cetera, that needs to get documented. Generative AI can do most of that by just reading the raw logs and creating that summary. And the last area that I think we've probably seen the most advancement is really making the threat detection and response process much more automated and efficient from that perspective. And so that's kind of the main use cases that I'm seeing for kind of AI for cyber. If I pivot a little bit and I talk about responsible AI, that really starts with making sure that you're securing the data that the model is being trained on. You're making a conscious decision on whether or not the data contains personally identifiable information or not. Is that consistent with what your privacy policy is and what you've communicated to customers? If appropriate, you're masking sensitive data within the model. You're thinking about things like who has access to my generative AI model. If I've got an in-house, custom model that I've built, you're thinking about things like, do any of my models have any biases in the way that they're acting? How is the output being used to inform decisions? What type of QA processes do I have to look for things like model drift over time? It's possible that models could drift out of expected tolerance ranges. And so we've got a number of clients that are looking at that notion of responsible AI as much as they are kind of using it for a security perspective.
And that means, those now being in the forefront, that they're really accelerating all both the prevention and, finding where are the holes and so on, which of course took a long time if we back from when you were coding internet in the
Anytime we
early
introduce
days.
a
I
new
mean, it's just a gigantic difference here. Have someone both thinking and also generating the code, and then it moves very much to the validation of that and securing that's right thinking behind.
I think anytime we introduce a new technology, it creates both opportunity and vulnerabilities. And generally, the technology accelerates the pace of that from what we're used to. We think about the change that the internet made in computing. It certainly created risks, and it certainly, cut down the time that it took for us to do things. We introduced mobile phones that had all kinds of power on the phone and the handset. That created opportunity. It created risks. Cloud computing, which we touched on earlier, that's causing the change in the technology environment to happen much more quickly, much more agilely. I think generative AI is just the most recent example of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So now let's look at the last 15 years, 10, 15 years. So
Okay.
without disclosing any specific company or country or whatever, could you share a notable cybersecurity case study you've been involved in? And what were the challenges and how did you and your team actually handle those? So
Sure.
you can maybe from an industry perspective or say, yeah, here we had something, and that would be
Sure.
super interesting to see and also to exemplify for listeners. Okay, what happened in
Sure.
that specific case?
So, I think the most interesting example I can give you was working a nation state actor investigation. And so, obviously won't name the nation state, but nation state actors are probably the most sophisticated and talented because they have the most resources and in some cases the most motivation, right? And so just from a intellectual challenge, really understanding the way this attack occurred required that diverse set of people that I talked about earlier. that really thought about it from a technical perspective, that understood the geopolitics between this nation state and our client and why the nation state might be interested in them. That caused us to look in a certain spot for signs of activity that we found more of than what we first. One of the things that investigation reminded me again, though, is that these actors are people. And again, I touched on it earlier. They're not just lines of code; they're actual people. And the example that I'll remember, we came in one morning, and there was no activity from the previous 24 hours. And it was really the first time we could remember where there was no activity, and that was very surprising to us. And what I realized, we looked up the national holiday calendar in that nation, and it happened to be a national holiday, probably one of the biggest national holidays in that organization. And these people essentially took the day off, right? They were government employees, and they were off just like any other government employee would be off. The other example I'll give you of that is they took a lunch break for an hour. Every day at local lunchtime in their country, you could predict that the volume of activity would go down. And so I think that's a great reminder to me that there is a person on the other end of that keyboard that has a motivation, that has weaknesses, that makes mistakes. And you're really working almost on a person-to-person basis to countermand some of those. The other thing that really reminded me in this scenario was we were trying to predict what the actor would do next and when they would go from having access to causing harm. And there was a specific system that they had access to, but they hadn't yet touched the sensitive data. And in order for us to get them out of that system, we'd have to bring the system down. And this system was very important to generating revenue to the company. And so we're trying to balance the definitive impact of bringing the system down and what that might cost the organization to the potential impact that this actor would actually get access to the data and do something nefarious with it. And so we had to make a judgment call. We had to advise the client on a judgment call on what to do. And based on what we knew about this actor, based upon what they had already done within this company and what we thought their motivation was, we felt like it was almost certain that they were going to get access to this data. And that ultimately our recommendation was you need to take this system offline. It's going to have a revenue impact for a period of time, but it's ultimately going to be the right thing to do to protect your customer data. The executives at the client made that decision to take the system down. And as we went later in our investigation and we looked across the industry at other clients that were being targeted by this same actor, in hindsight, we were 100% correct to take that system down, that the revenue that was lost for that short kind of 4-hour period where we had to clean up the environment was quite a bit less damage than what would have happened if we'd have given that threat actor just a few more hours of time on that system.
There's some tough decisions to be made and some really good thinking to get there. That is super exciting listening to you, Joe. So we have a lot of youngsters coming up in new positions. And what advice would you give to aspiring cybersecurity professionals or future leaders in this field?
Again, I think it's about continuous learning, and you learn really, in my view, through 3 ways. You read, right? You've got to have a robust reading list where you're, looking at social media sites. You've got news feeds that you're consuming, perhaps websites that you're looking at. You talk to people, right? I talk to my peers within my company every day. I talk to our software alliance partners. I talk to my clients to see what they're doing. You should learn from each interaction you have with anybody that's in the field. And then lastly, you learn by doing. And so getting a lab that you can tinker with and you can try this stuff out, particularly now with cloud service providers, you can generally stand up a lab environment, very cheaply and much easier than when I was building labs with physical machines. I remember one time we probably had to build 20 physical servers over the course of a week where we were building this lab together where we could eventually launch simulated attacks. Now I could probably deploy that same environment in a few minutes in a cloud environment. And so really getting hands-on with both the attacker techniques and the defensive technologies is one of the best learning mechanisms that's out there.
I think you're coming back to constantly the motivation. If you really are excited about something, which you are, then you are motivated, and then you have the thinking ongoing. You meet people, and then you listen, you ask, and then suddenly you're just in the middle of it. You get in the flow, and that's how you grow with other people, and of course in your field of expertise. So
That's right. That's well said.
I would like to thank you so much for being part of this today and sharing all your insights and valuable advice to us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter. It's been great.
Thanks.